You know what's wild about trust? People act like it should just exist in a vacuum, like you're supposed to blindly believe someone without any proof. But when reality hits and you need actual verification, suddenly you're the crazy one. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you're into these kinds of messy relationship stories, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. Trust me, I've got plenty more drama to share. So there I was last Thursday night sitting in our cramped apartment watching Cameron glued to some mindless sports game on TV. 2.5 years we've been together, 8 months of me practically carrying this relationship while living in his place, and this man still acted like I was just some background noise in his precious routine. The way he completely zoned out during these games, totally ignoring my existence, it was beyond insulting. I've been reconnecting with Elliot lately, remembering what it felt like to have someone actually listen when I spoke, and Cameron's emotional absence was getting harder to tolerate. Lindsay had called me earlier that day, absolutely devastated after discovering her boyfriend had been cheating with multiple women. Multiple. And she never saw it coming because she trusted him completely. That conversation got me thinking I needed to know for sure what Cameron was really up to. I mean, he stayed late at work constantly, always kept his phone screen down on tables, and lately he'd been even more distant than usual. Let's be real here. Cameron wasn't exactly the most engaging guy to begin with. Sure, he was stable and reliable, but those qualities don't exactly set a woman's world on fire, you know. I positioned myself directly in front of the TV and made my announcement, "We need to talk. I'm going through your phone tonight to see if you're loyal." The way he just blinked at me with that blank expression was so typical Cameron, never any real reaction to anything important. Why, he asked in that flat tone of his, so I explained Lindsay's situation and how I needed verification, not just blind faith. That's when he completely blindsided me by immediately unlocking his phone and handing it over without any resistance whatsoever. Just like that. I asked, genuinely caught off guard. Most guys would at least put up some kind of fight, right? But Cameron just shrugged with that infuriating calm of his and said, "Check whatever you want." So I did exactly that. I went through absolutely everything: text messages, Instagram, DMs, Snapchat conversations, email accounts, even his banking apps, searching for suspicious transactions. And you know what I discovered? Nothing, absolutely nothing remotely interesting. Just work emails, fantasy football, garbage with his buddies, endless photos of his dog, and texts with his mother about dinner arrangements. It was almost offensive how mundane his digital life turned out to be. That's when Cameron casually dropped his bombshell, "So I can check yours too, right?" My stomach immediately twisted into knots because, unlike his squeaky clean phone, mine contained months of conversations with Elliot that I definitely couldn't let Cameron see. Elliot had been reaching out during his messy divorce proceedings, and I'd been supportive. I mean, maybe more supportive than I should have been. We'd been sharing memories about our past relationship, exchanging photos, even planning coffee meetups that I told Cameron were work-related meetings. But that's completely different, I said, quickly, instinctively clutching my phone against my chest. How exactly is it different? Cameron pressed, and I could see suspicion starting to creep into his usually passive demeanor. "Because I'm not the one who might be cheating," I shot back, though. Even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hypocritical they sounded. The truth was, while I wasn't technically cheating in the physical sense, those conversations with Elliot were definitely crossing boundaries I wouldn't want Cameron discovering. Cameron kept pushing for access to my phone, and I felt myself getting increasingly defensive. "You don't need to see my phone because it contains private information," I insisted, but he wasn't accepting that explanation. "Stop trying to flip this situation around on me, Cameron. This is about your loyalty, not mine." But he just sat there with that maddeningly composed expression, methodically pointing out how he'd allowed me complete access to his phone, including his embarrassing search history about home repairs. What could possibly be on your phone that's more private than that?" he asked, and I felt completely trapped. Because the reality was there was significantly more private content on my phone than his toilet fixing searches. Months of emotional conversations with Elliot, photos we'd shared, detailed complaints about Cameron that I'd confided to Elliot whenever I felt frustrated with our relationship. Nothing physical had occurred, but emotionally I'd been cultivating an entire relationship behind Cameron's back. "You're being manipulative." I accused him, which was rich considering my own behavior, but panic was setting in. I absolutely could not let him see those messages with Elliot. They would obliterate everything we built together, not because I was cheating exactly, but because they would reveal how I'd been emotionally investing in another man while simultaneously criticizing Cameron to that same man. When Cameron suggested we should end our relationship if I couldn't trust him enough to show my phone, I assumed he was bluffing. But when I called that bluff and said, fine, maybe we shouldn't be together, he simply said, okay, and returned his attention to the television. The sheer audacity, I stormed out, expecting him to chase after me, but he didn't budge. I ended up at Lindsay's place, furious and completely bewildered. The most infuriating part was knowing I was being a complete hypocrite. I demanded total transparency from him while concealing my own secrets. But in my mind, what Elliot and I shared wasn't equivalent to cheating. We were simply talking, reminiscing, providing emotional support for each other. Cameron would never understand the deep emotional connection Elliot and I maintain. He just interpreted it as betrayal, when really it was just complicated. I spent that entire night at Lindsay's place expecting Cameron to call or text pleading for me to come home. But my phone remained silent. By Saturday morning, desperation was creeping in. I texted him about working things out, about loving him. His response, who did you delete texts from? Because apparently I've been stupid enough to mention deleting messages during our confrontation. I attempted to dodge Cameron's question about the deleted texts, but his persistence was relentless. Eventually, I had no choice but to return home and face the consequences. When I walked into our apartment Saturday evening, Cameron was in the kitchen doing meal prep like absolutely nothing had happened. The casual way he continued his routine while I was emotionally falling apart inside was absolutely infuriating. It was Elliot, I finally admitted in a quiet voice. I watched Cameron's expression shift when I spoke that name. Elliot, my ex, who supposedly meant nothing and who I claimed never to contact anymore. How long have you been texting Elliot? Cameron asked, and I had to confess it had been going on for months of hidden conversations. I started crying, attempting to explain that the situation wasn't what it appeared to be. Elliot was struggling through his divorce, and I was simply being a supportive friend. But Cameron interrupted me and asked the question I'd been dreading. Were they flirty texts? I tried minimizing it, claiming not really, maybe some might look questionable out of context, which was a complete lie. They were definitely flirty, and the context made them significantly worse, not better. When Cameron demanded to see the messages, I told him I deleted them permanently, but this man who I'd been consistently underestimating knew about the recently deleted folder. Of course he did. Show me the recently deleted folder, he said, and I felt my world beginning to collapse. Those messages would expose everything, how I'd been complaining about Cameron to Elliot, sharing intimate details about our relationship problems, even sending photos that weren't inappropriate but were definitely intended to capture Elliot's attention. I can't do that, I said, my hands trembling as I gripped my phone. You'll misinterpret everything. But Cameron actually laughed, genuinely laughed, and said the fact that there was a way to misinterpret it told him everything he needed to know. He was right, and I despised him for being right. I tried explaining that I was just trying to protect his feelings, but he threw my own logic back at me about how I'd been perfectly fine, potentially hurting him by searching through his phone. When I continued refusing to show him the messages he issued, an ultimatum, show him the phone or pack my belongings, I couldn't believe he was being so harsh and unreasonable. This felt like emotional abuse, didn't it? Forcing me to choose between my privacy and our relationship. I called Lindsay for support, but even she took Marcus's side, labeling me a hypocrite. My own best friend abandoned me when I needed her support most. After refusing to show Cameron the messages and being told to pack my things, I ended up staying with my mother, Michaela. But the drama was just beginning to escalate. Elliot, the man I'd been having these secret conversations with, had the audacity to text Cameron calling him controlling and abusive. Can you believe that nerve? The guy who'd been encouraging me to complain about my boyfriend was now lecturing Cameron about appropriate boundaries. My mother called Cameron, attempting to defend my position, but he shut her down immediately. He told her about the deleted messages with Elliot, and suddenly even my own mother was questioning my version of events. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, she said weakly when Cameron explained about the hidden conversations, but I could detect the doubt creeping into her voice. Then Cameron had the unbelievable audacity to have security refuse me access when I showed up at his workplace trying to have an adult conversation. He actually told them I was his ex-girlfriend and that he wasn't available to see me. Ex-girlfriend, we'd had one argument and suddenly I was relegated to ex status. I waited in that lobby for hours, texting him about how embarrassing this situation was for me, how it was his fault that security was forcing me to leave. I attempted to get our mutual friend Griffin to mediate the situation, but Cameron wasn't interested in compromise. Griffin texted me back saying Cameron would consider talking if I explained what was contained in the deleted messages, but that was impossible. Those messages would make me look terrible. All my complaints about Cameron, the flirtatious exchanges with Elliot, the photos, the coffee plans that I'd lied about. So I composed a lengthy email to Cameron explaining how he was being controlling and manipulative, how his behavior constituted emotional abuse by demanding access to my private conversations. I detailed how his actions were making me feel unsafe and violated, but he responded with a single line about picking up my belongings on Saturday, like our entire relationship meant absolutely nothing to him. The most frustrating part was how everyone was automatically taking his side. Even Lindsay, who should have understood what I was experiencing, was acting like I was the problem. Nobody seemed to care that Cameron was being completely unreasonable and controlling. They all just fixated on the fact that I'd been talking to Elliot like that was some unforgivable transgression. Saturday arrived and I showed up to collect my belongings with Lindsay and two guys I'd hired for security, Griffin and another friend. I didn't feel safe being alone with Cameron after his recent behavior, but when I announced this dramatically, Cameron just stared at me like I was completely irrational. "You lived here for 8 months without any issues," he said, completely missing the point of my concerns. He'd already packed all my possessions and arranged them by the door. Everything was organized and labeled, even my delicate plants were carefully protected. It was almost insulting how efficiently he'd erased my presence from his life. I searched through the boxes looking for something to complain about, some reason to extend my stay and potentially work things out, but everything was accounted for. Then I remembered my grandmother's ring and accused him of keeping it, but it was right there in my jewelry box, exactly where it belonged. I felt foolish, but I kept pushing, demanding my share of the apartment deposit. Cameron pulled out screenshots of our old text conversations, proving I'd insisted on staying off the lease because I didn't want that level of commitment. He'd been systematically saving evidence of everything preparing for this exact moment. Even the guys I'd hired started turning against me. When I tried explaining about the deposit, one of them agreed that Cameron was correct. When I mentioned the deleted texts, they looked at me like I was the actual problem. Finally, desperately, I offered to show Cameron the messages if he'd agree to reconcile with me. But he said no conditions, show him immediately or nothing at all. So I complied. I showed him glimpses of the conversations with Elliot, him expressing how much he missed me admitting I thought about him sometimes, him questioning whether I was happy with Cameron, me responding that it was complicated. The flirtatious photos we'd exchanged, the coffee plans that I'd lied about calling work meetings. Cameron saw enough to understand what had been happening behind his back for months. We never did anything physical. I insisted desperately, but Cameron labeled it an emotional affair. When I argued that wasn't a real thing, he threw my own words back at me about searching through his phone for evidence of cheating while I was secretly texting my ex. Even the guys I'd hired were shaking their heads disapprovingly at me. One of them actually said my behavior was messed up, and I reminded him I was paying him for assistance, not commentary. It's been a month since I moved out of Cameron's apartment, and I'm completely done pretending any of this was my fault. Everyone wants to treat me like I'm some terrible person for having conversations with Elliot, but nobody wants to acknowledge how Cameron's neglect and emotional unavailability drove me to seek support elsewhere. The first week after moving out, I attempted to set the record straight with our mutual friends. I explained how Cameron had been emotionally abusive and controlling, demanding access to my private conversations and threatening eviction. But apparently Cameron had been sharing screenshots of our text exchanges with people, making me appear like the villain. Most of our friends quickly figured out that I'd been the one hiding things while accusing him of infidelity. The most painful part was watching everyone abandon me. Lindsay stopped returning my calls after I repeatedly asked her to talk sense into Cameron. My mother started making comments about how maybe I should have been more forthright from the beginning. Even Griffin, who I thought remained neutral, told people that Cameron had handled everything fairly and I'd been caught in a web of my own deception. I attempted dating again, meeting someone new through an app, but when I suggested we should be transparent with each other and check each other's phones after a few weeks, he immediately ended things. Apparently, word had spread about what happened with Cameron, and this new guy said he wasn't interested in dating someone with trust issues and a history of emotional infidelity. Now I'm living with my mother single and watching Cameron move forward with his life while everyone treats him like some kind of hero for standing up to me. Look, I wasn't the villain in this situation. I was a woman who felt neglected and unappreciated, who sought emotional connection wherever I could find it. If Cameron had been a better boyfriend, more attentive and engaging, instead of just sitting there like a lump watching sports, I never would have needed to talk to Elliot in the first place. But nobody wants to hear that perspective. They all just want to focus on the deleted text and act like that makes me the bad person. Well, I'm done apologizing for having emotional needs that weren't being met by someone who treated me like furniture in his own home.